At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's Aram. Let's begin. Dr. Orange Gestalt had always believed his gods were artists, but the 10,000-year-old lump of riveted iron he'd just dug up suggested they were, in fact, lowly Homo sapiens. The deep strata excavation beneath the serene, wind-scoured plains of Apex hummed with success. For weeks, his new sub-resonant geoscanner, a piece of dangerously innovative tech he'd personally wrestled through a committee of budget-minded traditionalists, painted a flawless picture of the planet's lithosphere. By every conceivable metric, he was the preeminent archaeologist on the Luminar Ascendancy, a scholar whose treatises on the ethereal, light-spun architecture of the mythical Star Weavers were foundational texts. He was a being of facts, of data, and of an unshakable belief in his people's sublime origin. This profound certainty made the anomaly on his screen a personal affront. "The discrepancy persists, Doctor," an intern named Ibis reported, his face, which held a faint internal luminescence like all Luminar, a perfect canvas of polite confusion. "The scanner shows a pocket of absolute null density. It's a vacuum-sealed chamber that registers as a geological contradiction. All prior surveys of this region confirmed solid bedrock for another 2 kilometers. Oren felt a delicious spark of vindication. "Prior surveys," he noted, his tone dripping with the patient superiority of a professor correcting a child, "were effectively tapping the planet with a rock tied to a string. They were blind, Ibis. This is why we champion new methods." He tried to sound magnanimous. "Proceed with a micro-breach. I suspect a naturally formed cavern of unprecedented scale, perhaps lined with mineral deposits." The results were something other than a cavern. When the sonic lances pierced the anomaly, they met a material that screamed defiance through the haptic feedback. It was hard. It was artificial. The readouts cascaded across Oren's data slate, each number a tiny dagger in the heart of his life's work. The alloy was an obscene chimera of iron, carbon, and nickel, dense and forged with a crudeness that felt like a deliberate insult. Worse, a metamaterial coating on the outer layer perfectly mimicked the resonant signature of the surrounding rock, absorbing millennia of scans and rendering the chamber invisible. It was a technological lie, designed to last forever. After hours of painstaking labor, they extracted it. A dull, gray container, rectangular and utterly devoid of the elegant, flowing lines that defined the divine Star Weavers. Its form was brutally utilitarian. It was ugly. With the careful, deliberate motions his manipulators used to brush dust from millennia-old pottery, Oren engaged the magnetic seals. They hissed open, releasing a puff of 10,000-year-old vacuum. He peered inside, his mind ready to categorize, to analyze, to place this new artifact into the grand tapestry of Luminar history. He found sacrilege. The first object was a weapon, a primitive projectile thrower made of stamped metal and what appeared to be petrified wood. It smelled faintly of oil and decay. The second was a thick, practical steel blade with the barbaric runes K-A-B-A-R crudely stamped into the hilt. The third and final object, however, was what truly fractured his worldview. It was a faded piece of fabric, rectangular in shape, depicting a white circle against a field of blue, bisected by a garish red chevron. Emblazoned across it were 4 angular alien symbols, N-A-S-A. Orin stared, his mind a screeching cacophony of cognitive dissonance. This was the work of beings who built with rivets and right angles. This was the work of plumbers, of mechanics, of savages who flung bits of metal at each other. The air in the climate-controlled chamber suddenly thrummed with the imagined sound of a million historical textbooks screaming in agony and bursting into flame. This wasn't a discovery. It was the gravestone of a god. "Port! No, your other port!" Gabriel Kipp screamed, his knuckles white where he gripped a support strut.
"I only have one port side, you bellowing simpleton!"
Zyla shot back. The slight miscalculation, a ship held together by Boris's questionable welding and sheer stubbornness, corkscrewed through a blizzard of shimmering plasma bolts. Alarms blared a frantic, overlapping chorus of doom. "Then go starboard! Just don't go straight!" Gabriel yelled, bracing himself as the ship shuddered violently. In the engine room, a mountain of a man in oil-stained coveralls was laughing. "Their energy conduits are overheating!" Boris Orlov bellowed over the comms, his voice a joyful boom of professional contempt. "It's classic cascade failure. Flimsy! You see what happens when you forsake thick, honest-to-goodness copper wiring for these pathetic superconductor filaments? You get this garbage!" Their heist of high-value aesthetic fixtures from a supposedly low-security warehouse on Spindle Station had gone, to use a technical term, catastrophically sideways. The low-security designation had apparently been a clerical error for impenetrable fortress guarded by a legion of very angry Luminar justiciars. Their elegant plasma rifles fired silent, shimmering lances of coherent heat, a stark contrast to the deafening roar of Gabriel's anachronistic slug thrower, a beloved relic named the Argument Ender, which was currently chewing chunks out of the hangar bay doors. "We've got the crate!" Gabriel shouted, firing another 3-round burst that sent ricochets screaming throughout the hangar. "Zyla, get us out of here before they scratch the paint!" "What paint?" Zyla's deadpan voice crackled back. She threw the ship into a stomach-churning lateral thrust, scraping the landing gear against the station superstructure with a sound like a dying god gargling nails. The ship burst from the hangar and into the blackness between worlds. A whole swarm of Luminar patrol craft, sleek and silent as hunting sharks, clung to their tail. "Okay, new plan," Gabriel said, scrambling back to the cockpit. "Boris, I need you to do that thing." "The thing with the primary coolant flush?" Boris asked, a note of pure childish glee in his booming voice. "The very same."
"Target of opportunity,"
Zyla cut in, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen. A massive interstellar freighter, the size of a small moon and moving with the ponderous grace of a tectonic plate, was lumbering out of its orbital path.
"Their engine wash will blind every sensor in this sector for at least 5 minutes.
Gabriel grinned. "You heard the lady, Boris. On her mark." Zyla pushed the slight miscalculation to its limits, diving directly toward the freighter's colossal engines. They glowed with the terrifying intensity of captive blue stars. The Luminar ships followed, tightening their attack pattern for a kill shot. Just as they entered the wash zone, the ship's proximity alarms screaming in protest, Zyla shouted,
"Now!"
Boris vented the primary coolant reserve. A massive, glittering cloud of frozen particles erupted from their stern, a sudden, blinding nebula of ice crystals. The lead pilots of the Luminar ships, their sensors instantly whited out, flinched. In that same instant, Zyla plunged the slight miscalculation into the turbulent, sensor-annihilating exhaust plume of the freighter. They were tossed about like a leaf in a hurricane, alarms shrieking as the hull temperature spiked to critical levels. The Luminar patrols, faced with the choice of flying blind into a particle storm or being cooked alive by a fusion engine, wisely broke off. Later, adrift and cloaked in the freighter's lingering radiation, They assessed the damage. The ship was battered, their fuel reserves were dangerously low, and a sector-wide bounty with their faces on it was probably already being broadcast on every public channel. Gabriel kicked the crate they'd risked everything for. A decorative panel fell off, revealing a stack of what appeared to be high-end, self-warming, monogrammed Luminar toilet seat covers. "Well," he said, slumping into his captain's chair, "we are officially, unequivocally, and spectacularly screwed." Dr. Oren Gestalt stood before the Luminar High Council, his hands trembling as he presented his data slate. The council members, ancient and draped in robes that seemed woven from captured light, gazed down from their floating daises. Their expressions held no intellectual curiosity, only a cold, reptilian fear. "The carbon dating is conclusive," Oren stated, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "The artifacts are 10,000 years old. The metallurgy is crude, yet effective. The genetic residue matches with 99.9% accuracy the baseline genome of the species known as human." High Arbiter Lycor, a gaunt luminar with eyes like polished voids in a porcelain mask, floated forward slightly. "And you propose, Doctor, that our creators, the divine star-weavers who gifted us enlightenment, were these boisterous, greasy primates from the Sol system?" "The evidence is undeniable," Oren insisted, his voice cracking. "Our entire historical record must be re-examined. This is the greatest discovery in—" "Heresy," Lycor interrupted, his voice soft but laced with tempered steel. "This is a pathetic attempt to destabilize the Ascendancy. You have brought us clever forgeries, Doctor, and the fairy tale woven from your own ambition." The verdict was instantaneous. The council declared his findings fraudulent. They stripped him of his title and branded him a heretic. Oren heard Lycor give the quiet order for his permanent disappearance to the Justiciar guards. As the guards moved to flank him, a primal instinct he never knew he possessed surged through him. He feigned a sudden collapse, a gasping, shuddering fit that sent the two guards moving to catch him. It was a pathetic, academic's attempt at a diversion, but it was enough. In the moment of confusion, he shoved one guard into the other and bolted. He ran for a side corridor, a service passage he knew from his student days, a route used by custodial drones. He didn't need a public terminal. He was smarter than that. For months, a sliver of professional paranoia, a fear that one of his rivals might try to sabotage his work, had prompted him to acquire a piece of black market tech. Ducking into a dark maintenance alcove, he pulled off his shoe, pried open the heel, and removed a wafer-thin device. A single-use subspace burst caster. He'd already loaded it with his full data package, a dead man's switch for his career. He pressed the activation stud. The data, untraceable and instantaneous, blasted out to a network of fringe academics and information brokers he'd cultivated. He dropped the chip and crushed it under his heel, the crunch of circuits the last sound of his old life. Then he melted into the sprawling, shadowy underbelly of the capital city, a ghost haunted by the truth. The bar, the gravity well, smelled of the reek of spilled synthale, the metallic tang of unshielded power conduits, and the faint, unsettling scent of deep-fried tentacle. Its name was both a location and a financial statement for most of its clientele. Gabriel, Zyla, and Boris hunched over a sticky table, nursing glasses of something that tasted vaguely of battery acid. "So," Gabriel said, swirling the foul liquid. "We're broke, we're wanted criminals, our high-value aesthetic fixtures turned out to be luxury bathroom accessories. On the plus side, our ship is only mostly on fire." "The port thruster housing is compromised," Boris rumbled, looking genuinely sad. "The particle flow is inefficient. It makes my heart ache." Zyla took a slow sip of her drink, not even flinching.
The bounty is for 50,000 credits per head. We can't even afford to turn ourselves in.
Gabriel was about to launch into another sarcastic monologue when he caught a snippet of conversation from a nearby table. A twitchy-looking information broker with a cluster of independently moving eye stalks was whispering to a hulking Heck mercenary.
"Some academic lunatic went rogue. The council wants him gone, but someone else put out an anonymous transport contract. Off the books, no questions asked. 100,000 credits for a simple taxi ride off-world."
Gabriel's ears went up. 100,000 credits wasn't just a ticket out. It was new thruster housings. It was fuel. It was enough good whiskey to forget the toilet seat incident entirely. He straightened up, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Kids," he announced, his voice filled with a sudden terrifying optimism, "I think our luck is about to change." The meeting took place in Cargo Bay 19, a cavernous, dripping space that smelled of rust and illicit cargo. Their client arrived cloaked and hooded, moving with the furtive terror of a hunted animal. When he lowered his hood, they saw a wild-eyed, disheveled luminar whose elegant features were contorted with panic.
"You are the transport?"
Dr. Oren asked, his voice a reedy whisper. He eyed the slight calculation with open horror. Patches of mismatched plating covered the hull like metallic scabs.
"Does it fly?"
Mostly in the intended direction," Gabriel said cheerfully. "Gabriel Kip, Captain. My pilot, Zyla, and my engineer, Boris. Don't mind him, he's admiring your cloak's weave." Boris was, in fact, squinting at the fabric.
"Impressive tensile strength, but it's a nightmare to clean, though."
Oren looked from Gabriel's sarcastic smirk to Boris's oil-stained jumpsuit to Zyla's unnervingly calm expression. He looked ready to bolt.
"I need passage out of this system immediately. I can pay half now, half upon arrival."
"Sounds good, Professor," Gabriel said. "Just one thing. We're taking a big risk here. We need to know what we're getting into. A little proof of bona fides, if you will." Oren hesitated, then produced a small data slate. He activated it, and a holographic image flickered to life. It was the faded, archaic flag. NASA. Boris squinted.
Looks like one of those old pre-expansion corporate logos. Bold color choice."
Zyla raised a single, curious eyebrow. Gabriel went still. His usual mask of easy cynicism vanished. He'd seen that symbol before, not in a history file, but in a memory. His grandfather, a grizzled asteroid miner with hands like worn leather, had shown him a flickering image on an old data chip. Men in bulky white suits on a gray moon.
"That's where we came from, kid,"
the old man had said, his voice thick with a strange mix of pride and loss.
"Before we forgot how to be great."
It was a bedtime story, a myth. Seeing it here, in the hands of a terrified alien fugitive, felt like a ghost walking into the room. For a split second, the cynical, perpetually broke captain was gone, replaced by a kid staring at a legend made real. This was a job that mattered. He blinked, the moment passing. The smirk returned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right, Doc," Gabriel said, his voice suddenly serious. "You've got a deal. Get your skinny, glowing ass on our ship. Things are about to get interesting." "It's a signal," Oren explained, his academic fervor overriding his terror as they cruised through the deep black. "The moment I opened that container, the relics within sent a low-energy pulse. It activated a dormant system. My data slate triangulated the source." The source was a barren, pockmarked moon orbiting a swirling gas giant, a place cartographers had labeled geologically uninteresting. Zyla brought the ship down in a canyon that hid them from casual scans. The coordinates led them to a sheer cliff face, unremarkable except for a massive, seamless stone door 50 feet high. Its surface was covered in what Oren assumed were complex glyphs. "This could take weeks," he breathed, pulling out a cryptographic scanner. "Months, even, to decipher this language." "Move," Boris said, gently nudging the slender luminar aside. He placed a hand the size of a dinner plate on the door and pushed. A low, grinding sound echoed. He pushed again, in a different spot. Another grind.
It's not a language. It's a mechanical tumbler lock. Just bigger.
He walked around the base of the door, a savant of mechanical intuition. He planted his feet and shoved with his entire body at specific points, listening to the echoes. Clunk, kerchunk, boom. With a final satisfying clunk that vibrated in their teeth, the massive stone door shuddered and began to grind open, revealing a dark, cavernous space that smelled of dust and 10,000 years of silence. The interior was an armory. Racks of ancient human firearms stood in silent formation. In the center sat a rugged, six-wheeled, all-terrain vehicle with tires as tall as Gabriel. In the back, a holographic projector sat on a console. Boris, with the reverence of a priest, laid a hand on it. It flickered to life, casting a three-dimensional star map of the system into the dusty air. Several other moons and asteroids were highlighted. More vaults. In the center, a massive, blinking icon was labeled in stark, blocky letters. Command and Control. UNS Odyssey. Oren stared, his mind finally, completely, irrevocably broken. This wasn't a cache of artifacts. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, a map left behind by his ancestors. No, not his. Humanity's. The vault's activation sent a faint energy spike screaming across the sensitive instruments of the Heck warship Worldbreaker. Hegemon Volk, a towering humanoid with skin the color of granite, was in the Luminar system running a customs inspection blockade. Oren's data leak had been a minor curiosity. This energy spike was power.
Report,
Volk commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated the deck plates.
Energy signature of unknown origin, Hegemon,
an officer replied.
Matches no known modern technology, emanating from the third moon of the gas giant. It's old. Send the Reavers,
Volk ordered.
I want the source of that power.
Back in the vault, a shadow fell over the entrance. A Heck dropship descended, deploying a squad of heavily armed mercenaries, their shimmering personal energy shields deflecting the harsh sunlight.
Visitors,
Zyla stated calmly. chambering around in one of the ancient rifles she'd picked up.
They don't look like they're here for the historical tour.
The firefight was short, brutal, and baffling to the heck. They raised their shields and advanced. The first mercenary went down with a surprised grunt as a 7.62 slug ignored his sophisticated energy shield and punched straight through his chest plate. The shield could dissipate energy. It had no answer for a solid chunk of metal. It was like trying to stop a sledgehammer with a spider web.
Kinetic bypass!
Boris roared with ecstatic laughter, laying down suppressing fire with a heavy machine gun he'd mounted on a crate.
Their shields don't work on bullets! What magnificent bastards!
Gabriel grabbed Orin.
Get in the car!
It is a wheeled conveyance of unknown... Orin stammered.
It's a car! Get in!
They piled into the ATV. Gabriel reached for the large red button on the dashboard labeled Ignition.
Wait!
Boris yelled, already vaulting over the side and popping an access panel on the front. He peered inside, his face lit by a soft glow.
By the saints of Torque, a self-sustaining thorium decay power cell, and the fuel lines. It's a fully inert, stabilized hydrocarbon compound. It's beautiful.
He slammed the panel shut.
Okay, go.
Gabriel stomped the accelerator. With a deafening roar, the 10,000-year-old engine turned over. It ran on something that smelled suspiciously like diesel and fury. The ATV launched out of the vault, its massive tires tearing up the ancient ground as Zyla and Boris fired from the back. They blasted a path through the remaining mercenaries and raced towards the slight miscalculation. Zyla was already in the cockpit, firing up the engines as the ATV screeched to a halt under the landing ramp. They scrambled aboard as Zyla pulled the ship into the sky, performing a series of maneuvers that were less about piloting and more about insulting the laws of physics. Orin promptly threw up. They became Tomb Raiders, following the holographic map. It was a grand tour of humanity's lost, extremely badass legacy. On a frozen moonlet, they found a massive terraforming engine core, the size of a city block, still humming with dormant power. Boris spent 6 hours in a state of religious bliss, caressing conduits and murmuring sweet nothings to capacitor banks.
Look at the gauge on this wiring,
he cried, tears in his eyes.
You could jumpstart the sun with this. It's over-engineered to the point of art.
In a hollowed-out asteroid, they discovered a seed bank. Thousands of cryovials contained the genetic blueprints for Earth's extinct flora. Zyla, ever the pragmatist, identified a perfectly preserved cannabis plant.
For historical preservation purposes,
she said, carefully taking a small cutting and placing it in a nutrient-rich suspension in the cockpit. But it was Boris who found the true treasure. Tucked away in a storage locker labeled Emergency Rations was a crate of vacuum-sealed, golden, sponge-like cakes. The packaging, miraculously preserved, read, Twinkies. Boris picked one up, his massive hands trembling. He scanned it with his multi-tool, his eyes growing wide.
Incredible,
he muttered, his voice thick with awe.
The chemical stability is off the charts. The glucose density. Captain, this is more efficient as a long-term energy storage medium than a standard issue MRE. The shelf life appears to be functionally infinite.
He tore open the package as if it were a sacred text and took a bite. A single tear rolled down his cheek, tracing a clean path through the grease on his face.
Divine engineering,
he whispered. Dr. Orin watched it all, his existential crisis reaching its crescendo. His gods were a species that had apparently conquered the stars, misplaced their empire like a set of car keys, but not before packing snack cakes for the apocalypse. He sat down on a crate of 10,000-year-old assault rifles and put his head in his hands. The cargo bay of the slight miscalculation now looked like a museum, curated by a lunatic. Zyla stood at a console, running numbers.
A single one of these rifles sold on the black market could fetch enough to buy a small moon,
she said, her voice betraying a hint of astonishment.
The whole lot? We'd be set for life. Several lives.
Gabriel was quiet. He stood before the holographic map, staring at the blinking icon of the UNS Odyssey. He replayed the firefight on the moon, the cold competence of Volk's mercenaries. They hadn't come to study. They'd come to take. The image of the NASA logo flashed in his mind, the memory of his grandfather's voice. This wasn't just old tech. It was a birthright he never knew he had. The thought of some granite-faced thug co-opting it, using it to put his boot on the galaxy's throat, was a profound, visceral, and deeply personal insult. He looked at the map, at the promise of untold power. This stuff, it feels different, he said, his voice low. It's ours, and nobody else gets to touch it. Zyla and Boris turned to look at him. This was a new development. Gabriel turned to face them, his eyes burning with a fire they hadn't seen before. No one gets to use our history to kick the galaxy around. We're keeping it. Boris's face split into a wide, ferocious grin. For science? For science, Gabriel agreed. And for pettiness. Hegemon Volk was displeased. The loss of his elite Reaver squad was an insult. The power he had witnessed, the kinetic weapons that laughed at energy shields, had ignited an obsession. His intelligence network tracked the slight miscalculation to a neutral trading post. His forces ambushed them in a crowded marketplace, and in the confusion, they grabbed Dr. Oren. On the bridge of the World Breaker, Volk's second-in-command, Malak, watched the captive being dragged aboard.
He is a scholar, my hegemon. Weak. The pain stimulators will break him quickly.
Volk backhanded Malak across the bridge, the sound a sharp crack in the tense silence.
We are Heck, not butchers,
Volk snarled.
There is no honor in mindless cruelty.
He faced Oren not with tools of torture, but with cold, irrefutable history.
Your people, Doctor,
Volk began, his voice a low sneer,
pride themselves on their enlightenment. But where was that enlightenment when the Celestine hegemony enslaved my people for 3 centuries? Your ancestors watched. They debated. They did nothing.
He leaned closer, his granite face inches from Oren's.
I will not see the Heck vulnerable again. Tell me where the Prime Vault is, or I will dismantle your precious, cowardly ascendancy, library by library. Your people will pay for the sins of their silent gods.
For Oren, a man who had already lost his faith, but not his love for his people, the choice was no choice at all. Broken, he told Volk everything. Gabriel got the news via a garbled, encrypted message from one of Oren's academic contacts. Oren was taken. Volk was heading for Apex, and he knew where to look.
We owe him,
Zyla said, her voice flat, her jaw set.
They took our nerd!
Boris boomed.
That is unacceptable!
Gabriel stared out at a starfield, a plan forming in his head. It was born of desperation, stupidity, and a deep, appreciation for cinematic flair. "All right," he said, turning to his crew with a manic glint in his eye. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to mail ourselves to him." Boris's answering grin was a thing of terrifying beauty. They hollowed out a large iron-rich asteroid and parked the slight miscalculation inside. They used a cargo drone to set the entire package on a slow collision course with Volk's flagship. The Worldbreaker's point defense cannons vaporized chunks of the asteroid, but it was too large, too close. The impact was jarring. In the seconds of chaos, the slight miscalculation blasted out of the asteroid's husk and latched onto the flagship's hull like a remora. They cut their way inside, fighting through corridors of enraged Heck warriors. They found Orin in a holding cell, traumatized but unharmed.
Come with us if you want to live!
Gabriel yelled, blasting the lock. Orin just stared at him.
Is that another quote from an ancient Earth film?
No time for film criticism, Doc! Move!
They fought their way back as Boris planted repurposed mining charges on critical power conduits. They boosted away just as the explosives detonated, crippling the flagship in a series of brilliant, silent flashes. The gloves were off. Volk's entire fleet, battered but furious, formed a blockade around Apex. The slight miscalculation, scarred and smoking, had to get through. Zyla flew like a woman possessed. She used the planet's rings as cover, a glittering shield of ice and rock. She weaved through curtains of turbo-laser fire. She pulled a maneuver involving a gravity assist off Apex's smallest moon that made both Gabriel and Boris black out for a second. They punched through the blockade, a tiny, defiant meteor. Their landing was a guided crash. Zyla steered them away from a dense city center and brought them down hard in a massive, empty ceremonial plaza. The Luminar on the ground saw a fiery chariot of the gods descending, respectfully choosing a vacant lot to avoid harming any mortals. They found the entrance in the sub-basement of the High Council's spire. It led to a silent, deep-level maglev transport that rocketed them miles out to a subterranean facility. Before them stood a massive, featureless door, save for a single hand-shaped console glowing with a soft, white light.
"The key,"
Orin whispered, his voice filled with a reverence no longer for the Star Weavers, but for the magnificent, insane apes who had built this. Gabriel stepped forward and placed his hand on the console. It fit perfectly. A calm, synthesized voice filled the air.
Human DNA confirmed. Stand by for command viability scan.
A beam of soft, blue light washed over Gabriel. The voice continued, its tone neutral as a waiting star.
Subject motivation analysis. Greed factor. Significant but manageable. Hostile intent towards Prime Directive. Minimal. Propensity for chaotic, unpredictable heroism. Acceptable. Welcome back, Captain.
With a ground-shaking rumble that cracked the plains miles above, the vault door began to grind open, revealing the darkened, silent bridge of the UNS Odyssey. They stepped onto the bridge as the sounds of weapons fire echoed from the tunnel. Volk's ground troops had followed them. A frantic firefight erupted. Gabriel and Zyla took cover. Orin huddled behind the captain's chair. Boris, ignoring the plasma bolts whizzing past his head, slid under the main engineering console.
I need more power!
He yelled.
The primary ignition conduit is fused. The relay is shot. I need a conductive, high glucose, chemically stable biomass to bridge the contacts.
His eyes widened. He knew of only one thing in the universe that fit that description. With a tear glistening in his eye, he pulled out the last foil-wrapped Twinkie from his pocket.
"Your sacrifice will be legendary,"
he whispered to the snack cake. He mashed the golden cake into a thick, sticky paste in his massive hand and, with the focused delicacy of a bomb disposal expert, smeared it across the two exposed relay contacts, bridging the gap. For a moment, nothing. Then, a shower of sparks. The sugary, cream-filled paste fizzled, popped, and completed the circuit. The bridge lights flickered on, buzzing with 10,000 years of pent-up power. A calm, imperturbably refined, British-accented AI voice filled the air, laced with a faint hint of static.
Welcome back, Captain. Apologies for the delay. I was running a diagnostic. It has been 9,742 years. Power restored. Now then, ridding the premises of uninvited pests.
Small, silent turrets descended from the ceiling, vaporizing Volk's troops with lances of coherent energy. The firefight was over in 3 seconds. The voice spoke again.
I am Codex, the custodian of Directive Echo 9 for the UNS Odyssey. A pleasure to be of service again. How may I assist you?
The ground of the Apexian plains cracked and split wide open. The UNS Odyssey rose from its subterranean cradle and ascended into the sky. It wasn't elegant. It was a mountain of dark, brutalist metal, a flying fortress bristling with weapons. It was bigger, uglier, and more terrifyingly intimidating than any ship in the modern galaxy. Across the planet, the Luminar stared up in a unified expression of terrified, silent reverence. The Star Weavers had returned, and they were, it appeared, very, very angry. In orbit, Hegemon Volk stared at his screens in stunned disbelief.
All ships,
he commanded, his voice tight.
Open fire. Destroy that thing.
The Heck fleet unleashed its full might. Immense, hexagonal void shields flared to life on the Odyssey, absorbing the entire barrage without a single scratch. On the bridge, Codex's calm voice cut through the silence.
A rather spirited welcome, Captain Kip. Shall I deploy the spirited debate protocols?
Gabriel was sitting in the command chair. It felt like it was made for him. He grinned, a feral, triumphant, and utterly joyous expression on his face. This was the legacy he'd been searching for. "Light him up, Codex," he said. "Overkill is underrated." The Odyssey answered. Magnetic accelerator cannons and city killer missiles erased the Heck fleet from existence in 90 seconds. Volk's flagship was the last to go, turned into an expanding, silent cloud of superheated plasma. On the surface, the Luminar High Council hailed them as the return of their creators. They offered them lordship, planets, unimaginable wealth. Gabriel, leaning back in his new command chair, keyed the planetary comms. "That's all very flattering," he said, his voice broadcast across the planet. "But we're gonna have to pass. Just one question, though. You got any more of those Twinkies?" A confused silence was his only answer. The crew laughed, with a final, system-wide broadcast of Gabriel quoting another ancient film. "See you, space cowboys." They prepared to pilot the Odyssey into the unknown. As the faster-than-light drive began to spool up, its deep hum vibrating through the ship, Codex's voice cut in one last time.
Course laid in, Captain. Shall I activate the network?
Gabriel frowned. "What network?"
The automated signal to awaken the other 99 Odyssey-class vessels slumbering in their vaults across the galaxy, of course.
Codex replied, as if stating the obvious.
The contingency protocol dictates that when one command ship is reclaimed by the descendants of humanity,
All are to be made ready for service. Silence descended on the bridge. Zyla's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Boris let out a low, reverent whistle. A slow, dangerous, and cheeky wide grin spread across Gabriel's face. They weren't just a crew of 3 scoundrels and a traumatized nerd anymore. They were the inheritors of humanity's true, forgotten legacy. And they had the keys to the entire damn kingdom. The silence on the bridge hung for a moment, thick and heavy with the sheer, galaxy-altering scale of the revelation. Boris was the first to break it, letting out a booming, incredulous laugh that echoed off the ancient bulkheads.
100!
He roared, spreading his massive arms as if to embrace the cosmos itself.
100 ships built with thick, honest-to-goodness plating! 100 chances to show these flimsy filament peddlers what real engineering looks like!
His eyes, usually alight with their professional passion, now shone with the fire of a true believer who had just been handed Holy Scripture. Zyla, ever the pragmatist, didn't say a word. She walked calmly to the navigation console, her footsteps silent on the deck. With a few deft taps, she replaced the tactical view of Apex with a sprawling map of the galaxy. 99 brilliant pinpricks of light pulsed in the darkness, scattered from the core to the rim. She zoomed in on the closest one, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch of a smile at the corner of her mouth. She had spent her life calculating odds for survival. Now, for the first time, she was calculating the logistics of a resurrection. Gabriel looked from his crew to the star-dusted map. The cynical, perpetually broke captain who had risked his life for a crate of luxury toilet seats was gone. In his place stood a man who had stumbled backward into a legacy he never knew he deserved, but was now ready to claim. He caught the eye of the one non-human on his bridge. Dr. Oren Gestalt was staring at the pulsing lights, his hands clasped behind his back. The terror that had haunted him for weeks had vanished, replaced by a profound, scholarly wonder. "My people called them Star Weavers," he said softly, his voice clear and steady. "We thought they spun light into divine architecture and then departed, their work complete. We were wrong." He turned to Gabriel, his luminescent face filled not with fear, but with awe. "They weren't artists or gods, Captain. They were engineers. They were soldiers. They were gardeners. And they didn't leave. They just planted the seeds, set a timer for 10,000 years, and waited to see if their children would be worthy of the harvest." Gabriel's dangerous grin softened into a look of resolute purpose. He looked at Zyla, who nodded once, her hand resting on the FTL drive controls. He looked at Boris, who gave him a ferocious, grease-stained thumbs up. He looked at Oren, the first convert to the forgotten church of humanity. This wasn't just a crew anymore. It was a purpose. He leaned forward in the command chair, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that felt as natural as breathing. "Codex," he commanded. "Plot a course for the nearest beacon, and prepare a message for system-wide broadcast on all known frequencies when we arrive." "Of course, Captain," the calm AI replied. "What shall the message say?" Gabriel looked out at the starfield, at the promise of a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to be truly, brilliantly, and terrifyingly human. "Tell them," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, "management is back, and we're conducting a galaxy-wide performance review." Everyone cheered.